Having a graphical user interface is very convenient in managing many network devices, and we have an option of using something called the VMware host client to communicate directly between our management station and the individual ESXi host. We've configured static IP addresses on ESXi 1, 2, and 3. And one of the benefits of having an IP address is remote administration. We can connect to those IP addresses to communicate with those hosts. So let's imagine that this is our workstation right here that we're sitting at running Windows, and we want to go ahead and manage these ESXi hosts. Now we have three, or we will eventually, when we have all the pieces of vSphere installed, we'll have three basic options regarding clients. And the first one we're going to talk about is the VMware host client. And it basically goes like this. We sit at our computer, our management computer, we open up a browser, and we connect HTTPS over to the IP address or the name, if it's resolvable, of an ESXi host / with a UI for user interface. So for example, if we're connecting over to ESXi 1, it would be HTTPS : the resolvable host name of ESXi 1, which is ESXi-1.nuggetlab.com /UI. So we're using the browser along with HTML5 to connect directly to that ESXi host, at which point it'll ask us to authenticate with the user of root and the password we set up before it'll give us that access. Now, for those people who've been using VMware for a while, they used to have some client called the quote-unquote Windows client, which was a Windows-based application that could be used as a client to connect to the ESXi host. Well, as far as 6.5 and higher, the Windows client is no longer supported. So we're going to be using the VMware host client to connect initially via graphical user interface to our ESXi host if we want to manage them. And you might be saying, well, Keith, what about these other options here? We have these two other client options. What are they good for? Well, if and when in this course we add a vCenter server, which, if you recall from one of our earlier nuggets, we talked about using vCenter to centrally manage all of our ESXi hosts. Once we have that in place, for example, let's say we use a VCSA, which is the vCenter server appliance. Once we have that in our infrastructure and we can use that, we will then have the option of using these additional two clients. So the vSphere web client, I'll put that connection in blue, from our workstation we would connect over to vCenter. And the way we would connect over to vCenter would be HTTPS : the resolvable name of our vCenter server, let's say it's VCSA.nuggetlab.com /vSphere-client. And spoiler alert, that actually will be, once we deploy the vCenter server appliance, that will be the resolvable name for it. And so our workstation will connect to the vCenter server, and then the vCenter server can go ahead and manage the ESXi hosts. So the vCenter server is the middleman between the workstation, the management workstation, and the actual ESXi hosts. And for that to work, the browser that we're using from our management workstation does need to have a Flash plugin that's available and allowed on the browser we're using for the management via the vSphere web client. And for the last client, I'll go ahead and put it with a green identifier here. With the vSphere client, we would start off at the workstation with the browser. We'd go ahead and connect to the vCenter server once again. With the vSphere client, it's HTML5, and it doesn't require that Flash plugin on the browser. And then once we connect to the vCenter server once again is interacting with the ESXi host for the management of those hosts. And one of the questions that might come up is, well, Keith, why wouldn't we just always use the vSphere client with HTML5 instead of the vSphere web client, which is primarily what we are going to use? And the answer is, the vSphere client is not completely baked yet. It doesn't have the full feature parity with the vSphere web client. So at some point in the future, maybe the vSphere client itself will have all the bells and whistles that we need and want. But until then, we're going to be using the vSphere web client if we're working with the vCenter server to manage our vSphere environment. So to get to our main topic regarding this nugget, let's go ahead and take a look at the VMware host client because we don't have vCenter installed yet. And let's go ahead and connect from our management workstation right here, which is running Windows, and we'll log in and just have a look and feel at the user interface of the VMware host client, which allows us to manage individual ESXi hosts on a one-by-one basis. So in the hands-on lab environment, we're going to log on as the administrator on the Windows 2016 server named DCNUG here in our lab environment. So we're going to use a lab password. If you want to copy paste that using the clipboard function in the lab, you can, or you can just type it in. If we click on the little eyeball, it'll confirm what that password is, and then we'll go ahead and click on the arrow to log on as administrator. This Windows computer that we're using is named DC-NUG. It is a domain controller with Active Directory services. It's also acting as our DHCP server and DNS server. So before we open up a browser and connect over to ESXi1, let's do some name resolution just to verify that the DNS behind the scenes is correctly working. So on the Windows computer, let's go ahead and right-click on the Windows icon in the bottom left-hand corner. And then from the menu, let's go ahead and select Command Prompt. Here at the Command Prompt, let's go ahead and do an NS lookup, space, and then we'll type ESXi-1.nuggetlab.com. and press enter. So this is a great confirmation of several things. Number one, our DNS server is dc-nug.nuggetlab.com, this computer, at the IP address of 192.168.1.100, and it resolved the name ESXi-1.nuggetlab.com to ESXi1's address of 192.168.1.101. That's perfect. So now that we know that name resolution works fine, we can close that window, and let's open up Internet Explorer. There's an icon right here on the taskbar for it. And here in Internet Explorer, let's go ahead and type in https:// and then the name of our ESXi host, which is ESXi-1.nuggetlab.com/UI for user interface. And then we'll press enter, and it's throwing us some shade regarding the self-signed certificate that's on the ESXi host. So effectively, this computer and the browser don't trust the signer of the digital certificate that ESXi1 is currently using, which is going to be typical in a newly deployed ESXi host that's using a self-signed certificate. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click on Continue to this website in our lab environment. So we'll click on that link, and let's maximize this window as well. And I'm also going to go ahead and hit the F11 key to take this full screen. And that way we can maximize the real estate. So if you want to bring that back from full screen, you can just hit F11 again, and it will bring it back. It's like Mr. Miyagi. Wax on, F11, wax off, F11. So our username for the ESXi host is root. That's the default username, lowercase. And then we'll click in the password field, and we'll supply our lab password. And we can click the eyeball just to verify what that is. And with that in place, we'll go ahead and click Login. It's asking me if we want to store a password for nuggetlab.com. I'm going to say no, not for that site. And give it a few minutes to crunch on that. And we're using effectively the VMware host client to communicate from our management workstation directly over to ESXi-1. Now, in reality, in a vSphere environment where we have a centralized management server like a vCenter server, it's not very often that we're going to be connecting directly from our management workstation over to the ESXi host directly with this client. However, if there's a failure of the vCenter server where it lost connectivity, or in our case where we don't even have a vCenter server installed yet, this is important to be aware of the functionality of connecting over to an ESXi host so you can manage it directly. So here in the lab environment with the VMware host client, if you want to kick the tires and walk around a little bit, certainly you can do that. So for example, if you want to click on monitor, we have tabs for performance, hardware events, etc. We have a graph. By default, it's showing CPU. From the drop-down, we can go ahead and select memory or network or disk. If we had virtual machines that had been deployed on this ESXi host, we can click on virtual machines to get a list of those VMs. Currently, there's no VMs present because we haven't deployed any yet. And if we click on storage, it'll show the current storage. And by default, there's a data store, which is a storage unit used by VMware ESXi hosts that's local on the local hard drive, and it's named Data Store 1 by default. So if we wanted to rename the data store, we can simply right-click on it. From the drop-down, select Rename. And let's go ahead and call this ESXi-1 underscore data store. And if we did that on each of our ESXi hosts, we renamed it ESXi1 data store, 2 data store, and 3 data store on ESXi1, 2, and 3 respectively. That way, later when we're managing the entire environment with vCenter, if we look at the data stores, we could tell by name whose local data store we're currently looking at. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Save to save that change, and I'm also going to go ahead and do that on each of the other 2 ESXi hosts. So I'm going to press F11 to go ahead and bring that browser out of full screen, and I'm going to go ahead and connect over to ESXi2, change the name of the data store, and ESXi3 and change that one as well, in preparation for that centralized vCenter management. That'll also give us a great opportunity in the lab to verify our communications between this workstation and each of our ESXi hosts. So for grins, let's go ahead and I'm simply going to modify the URL to a -2 ESXi2 and press enter. We'll click on continue to this website because it doesn't trust the self-signed certificate on ESXi2. We'll log on as root. We'll add the lab password, and then we'll go ahead and click on login. And this is the browser taking us to the same spot where we were over on ESXi1, but now we're on ESXi2. So we can see that up in the URL. So we'll go ahead and right-click on Data Store 1. We'll select Rename from the dropdown, and let's name it ESXi-2 underscore Data Store. And we'll save that, and then we'll go ahead and connect to ESXi3 and do the same thing. So now the URL is going to ESXi-3.nuggetlab.com. We'll click on Continue to this website. We'll log in as root with our lab password and click Login. And then once here on ESXi3, we'll go ahead and right-click on the data store, select Rename, and we'll rename this ESXi-3 underscore data store. And click on Save. And then we can go ahead and close this browser. Or formally, if we wanted to log off correctly, we could use the drop-down next to our name here of root and select Logout. And then we can close our browser. In this nugget, we discussed 3 different clients. The VMware host client, which allows us to connect directly to an ESXi host for management. And then 2 other clients that require the use of the vCenter server as the intermediary. And those 2 additional clients are the vSphere web client, which requires the Flash plugin, and then the not yet full-featured vSphere client, which is HTML5 based, but doesn't have the full features of the vSphere web client yet. So now I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to go ahead and do the hands-on practice in the lab environment to reinforce the skills and get some practice with the host client. And I'll see you, my friend, in the very next video. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.